Welcome to the Explore the Circular Economy show by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. My name is Seb, I'm part of the learning team here at the Foundation and I'll be your host for this episode. And we're back streaming every Tuesday across our portfolio of social media channels, backed by popular demand for a second season where we'll be exploring the shift away from a linear take-make waste economy to one that designs out waste and pollution, keeps products and materials in use and regenerates natural systems, a circular economy. So today I'm super pleased to be joined by my co-host.
Hello, I'm Lou and I work across the Foundation's editorial and digital teams.
And today we're going to be exploring some of the greatest hits of the circular economy, some of the finest examples of the concept in action to bring it to life, and we'll be relating those to the principles along the way.
And who better to help us do that than the Foundation's case study guru, Mr. Nick Jeffries. Now today we've got some great stuff in the studio, we've got some mega video clips to show you. So without further ado, let's crack into some of the circular economy's greatest hits. Sebo, if you would please.
I knew I was here for a reason.
Yes, you were. I'd like to begin with these rather fetching headphones. Nick, can you tell me, why are these such a great example of the circular economy and what makes them so distinctive?
Okay. Hi Seb, hi Lou. It's great to be back on the show. Yeah, anyone who knows me well will have heard the story of Gerrard Street. I do tell the story quite often. And the reason why is because they're a very nice, studio-friendly, compact illustration of two really, really important building blocks of the circular economy, and that is design and business models. So the two young designers who set up Gerrard Street, they were really into music, and they made this observation that about every year, something like 15 million kilograms of headphone material gets thrown away. And the industry, the sector is really growing very quickly. It's going to double every decade. And so they thought, well, how can we redesign headphones so there isn't so much waste? And so what they've done is they've created this modular headphone set, which they have reversible connections. And so you can swap in, swap out components as technology develops and you want to upgrade. But
just to confirm, Nick, with these headphones, all these different parts, there's actually a lot of different parts that go into a headphone. You can swap those out and repair them and replace them.
Exactly, yeah.
This comes apart into several different pieces. We're not going to demonstrate it live because we don't want to wreck person's headphones that we're borrowing, but it's actually quite simple when you've got the box and the instructions.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, electronics is a sector which is very connected to sort of new materials and digital, and so it really is evolving very quickly. So upgrades happen every year. You have better sound, better noise cancelling, whatever. And at Gerrard Street reckon that they can take 85% of the components from one set and use it in the next. Yeah. But that's just a design. The other thing is the business model. So rather than buying the headphones, they offer it as a subscription model, because not everyone can afford headphones, or maybe only want headphones for a limited amount of time. So you pay 8, 9, 10 euros a month, and then you have the use of the headphones, and when you finish with them, you return, and it stays in the Gerrard Street ecosystem. But this is just it's a small example to illustrate those two fundamental things: circular design, business models. Yeah. It can be applied to white goods, it can be applied to mobility, it can be applied to buildings. You can design buildings that are more flexible, more easy to take apart, you're able to change as economic circumstances change, and you're able to offer it as different business models. So it's a beautiful illustration of those 2 points.
The interesting thing about that for me is that, headphones can almost seem like it's just an everyday product. We kind of use them seamlessly, especially people work in offices and all those sorts of things. 15 million kilograms of waste every year. I think that's one of your favourite stats. You like a good stat, Nick. You're famous around our parts for liking a good statistic.
It's definitely in the top 10.
But this is one illustration of a sort of a zero in on the potential of rethinking the design and what that starts to open up. And then obviously once you've rethought the design, then you're incentivized to behave very differently is why they've also built in this different business model, because if you're going to design stuff to be able to capture all that value back, you need to have something that allows you to do that.
Yeah, indeed.
And as you said, there's a lot of different ways there's a lot of different products that can be applied to. We've actually, I think, on the desk got other examples of that, even something like packaging. Packaging, another thing that sits in our economy. We probably encounter packaging almost every single day, but thoughtlessly, and most of it's single use right now. We've got a couple of examples here, Loop and Splosh, where they've innovated, again, with this design and business model framework with circular economy principles in mind.
Yes, yeah. Sadly, that point, sadly, we do encounter every day, and not just in the supermarkets in our houses. We see it strewn all over the beaches and in the oceans of the world. And so, there is this plastic packaging. In many ways, is the sort of quintessentially linear part of our economy. And when you think about what kind of solutions to address this issue, recycling comes to mind, but we're not going to recycle our way out of this issue. In fact, there was a report done recently that said if we put 500,000 people, connected them to recycling infrastructure every day for the next 20, 30 years, you're still going to have more plastics going off at the ocean in 2040 than now. So you're not going to be able to recycle. We need other things.
This is the Pew Research study that came out during the summer.
Yes, exactly. So we're not going to recycle our way out of this situation. So we need other things. We need to eliminate plastic packaging that we don't require, but also we need to innovate. So our plastic packaging is compostable, recyclable, or in this case, reusable.
Feel free to pick any of these.
So these two metal tins here. That's an example of reusable packaging for the food. It's a company called Loop, and they offer us a reuse at home model. So what you do is you have your porridge or your rice delivered, and then once you have finished, you return the tin. A new tin is replaced, and then Loop collect it, they clean it, back to the retailer or back to the food brand, and then the packaging gets reused. And so that's actually quite a good illustration. It's not just a packaging on its own. You need the ecosystem. You need all the players. You need the logistics in place. You need the cleaning company in place. You need the retailers to be on board. So that's really important, that collaboration, that ecosystem. And it's not, and this is just an example from food. Here's another example here. This is a reusable shampoo bottle. And actually, this is where design comes in quite nicely. This bottle actually uses a little bit more plastic than you would have in a single use. But if you use it 30 times, which you can, it's got a nice, screwable lid that can be, you can refill it. So if you can use that 30 times, you'll use, in terms of life cycle, 95% less plastic than if you did 30 single-use bottles. So yeah, design.
There's a couple
innovation.
of things I'd pick up on what you said there, Nick. One is this, it really brings to mind this notion of effectiveness over efficiency. You mentioned the sort of ecosystem that sits around our products. The efficiency agenda for plastic has seen us use less and less material to try and reduce the amount of material inputs required, which, on the face of it seems like a relatively simple, sensible thing to do, but almost increases that product's sort of single-use status. The solution that Splosh and Loop have opted for, Loop's actually not using plastic anymore, is actually a completely different. It's more about thinking about how does this sit in the system? How do we recover this? How do we deliver these products? What's the system? And the other thing I think that those stories tell me is one of our colleagues, Joe Isles, who's our circular design lead at the foundation, often talks about this notion of circular-ish. So the idea of these examples as kind of being inspirations for the types of thinking and the types of applications of principles. We have to innovate towards this and sort of work out what works. And Loop's obviously an example that's had a lot of media attention recently. Many of our viewers might be saying, well, there's things here that don't completely stack up, including some of those ecosystem points. How does it actually work in practice? We're going to find a lot of that out, I guess, over the next few years as more of these kinds of models and design innovations come onto the market. So that's two examples of our greatest hits so far. Now, Nick, you promised me that you would wear one of our greatest hits today. Lou, can you guess what Nick's wearing that is the circular economy? And it's not his pants.
I've always liked the cut of Nick's cloth, such a style guru as well as a case study one. Is it the T-shirt?
It is the T-shirt. It is the T-shirt. Yeah. So what this T-shirt responds to, T-shirt and actually this jacket, they're made by a UK company called Paramo. And in clothing, often we're looking for, as well as aesthetics and the cut and stuff like that, but also the performance. So say if you're using it for sport or if you're going outside and you need water repellency. And often, the sort of almost the default to get that performance is our chemical coatings. So one example, is PFC, perfluorocarbons. It's a family of chemicals that are used to impregnate fabrics, textiles, to make them waterproof. But what we're finding is that, Greenpeace, they did a little study a few years back, and they went to 8 of the most remote locations in the world, places like north of China, Finland, Russia. They took snow samples, ice samples, and they were finding these PFCs, these water repellency chemicals, in the snow, in the ice. And of course, these then percolate into our water systems, surface water systems, and then our conventional treatment does not take them out. And so they found, actually, in 33 states of the US, that they found these PFCs in their water supply. Yeah. So clearly, this is not a good thing. These PFCs, they're linked to things like hormone damage. They're perhaps carcinogenic. So Paramo, they're saying, well, how can we have high performance wear but not using these kind of chemicals? And so they have come up with a list of green chemistry, biobenign chemicals. So they have their sort of approved list, and then they use that list to make formulations that then get these kind of performances.
Wow.
So it's a sort of safe and circular materials for the circular economy. That's a really, really important aspect.
And inspired somewhat by nature, I guess, the way nature works.
Yeah, absolutely. So some forward-thinking fashion designers are indeed looking to nature, because nature has all these crazy performance characteristics, water repellency, really lightweight structures and so on, iridescent colours, and they don't use toxic chemicals. She does not use toxic chemicals, yeah? What nature uses is a very small palette of materials. It doesn't use a lot of energy. All her processes are low temperature, low energy, but just very, very clever with the way she uses structures. So for example, a butterfly wing has this lovely iridescent colour that if you look at it from different directions, it changes, really sparkling iridescent. There's a company in Japan called Teijin that are using this micro-layering inspired by butterflies to create garments that are beautiful colours, produced at low energy, not using dyes.
So there's the designer business models. This is about what goes into how do we ensure that the material palettes that we're designing our products with are circular and safe. And actually, anyone who wants to dive into that a bit more, there is a collection of resources on our circular design guide at circulardesignguide.com, specifically on safe and healthy circular materials choices.
Okay, guys, we've done electronics, plastics, clothing, other products. Tell us about food.
Food, yes.
It is nearly lunchtime here
it
as well.
It is lunchtime, and unfortunately, it's a Tuesday, because what's sitting over there are a couple of cans.
I thought these were for us after the show.
Are they? Okay, maybe we can have that after the show. A couple of cans of beer there, and there's a circular story behind them. But before I go into that, when we think of circular economy, we don't necessarily think of the food system. Sort of, how does it apply to the food system? So, to answer that, let's consider what is the linearity of the food system? What is the state that we're trying to move from? The food system, as it currently is incredibly wasteful. It degrades nature, like the way we farm and produce our food can be very degrading. It's not necessarily very healthy. So what can we do about it? Well, let's just look at just one of those characteristics of the linear system: waste. At every stage of the food value, we call it the food value chain, going from production, processing, distribution, retail, catering, or whatever. At every stage, you lose perfectly, byproducts or perfectly good food. So what can we do about that? First thing, I reckon, is stop thinking about it as a chain. That's a very linear way of thinking about it. Think about it as a web, a network, where you can have these positive interconnections, you can have this really, really symbiotic sharing of nutrients or surplus food between the different parts of the web, such as bakeries, bread, sandwich shops. Often there is a surplus of bread at the end of the day. What do you need to make beer? You need malted barley. Yeah? Bread pretty well is malted barley. So what Toastale have done is they've replaced 30% of the barley inputs at the production stage with surplus bread, leftover bread, and they've created a beautiful beer. You can have we were talking about earlier, pale ale, lager, session. For any beer palate, they have an offering, and then in that way, you can have bread, you can have beer, but you don't need so much land because you're making like symbiotic use of between those two parts of the food sector. So that's one aspect of a circular economy for food, reducing waste and making better use of food byproducts. But there are other aspects to it, and I think we're going to
dive, just before we do, this also, we talk about here at the Foundation this notion of designing food, that food is designed. And in some ways, this is a bit of an example of that. The toast ale example is this notion that food, we don't think about it as being designed, but it actually is.
We don't. No, that's a really, really good point, actually. So, yeah, food, just like any other product in the, sort of in our economy or whatever, has a design, conscientious design. I suppose if you're just buying an apple or a carrot or something from the supermarket, that probably doesn't, if it's a simple ingredient. But anything that has undergoes some kind of change, some kind of process to make that final meal or that final product has a design input. And so circular food designers, if they understand, say, what is beneficial for the environment, or where the surplus food is being generated. So if they use those beneficial for environment ingredients, all those surplus food, turn them into food products or meals, they can help citizens make better choices. And so anyway, my point is food designers are a really important player in making this whole circular economy for food happen. Yeah.
So we are going to jump in a minute to a video clip that talks about some of the other aspects of food. But before we do that, we've shown you a few examples of the circular in action. So let us know in the comments which ones you like, what questions you have, any challenges you have to the examples we've given, or any related examples that you think we could also talk about. So jump that in the comments and we might be able to pick up on those in a little bit. But before we do that, Nick teased it, there's also an aspect of a circular economy for food in terms of, well, how is this food actually grown? And here we talk a lot about regenerative agriculture, and we've got a clip from Leontino Balbo Jr. in Brazil, where he talks a bit about his approach to his sugarcane farm.
I made myself open to the nature wisdom, and suddenly I started seeing inside the forest like an infographic, everything happening, the birds, the insects, and that everything was interconnected. And there was a very sophisticated system of communication. And I realized that all those insects were not attacking any plant inside the forest. But the same insects used to attack the canes. So why? So I started observing what used to happen inside that forest. And one by one, example by example, I learned, I started transferring to the agricultural area. There are lots of useful information in the nature that we can use to create the basis of a new production system, which is less impactant, which is more rational and more efficient. We can observe that these are totally healthy leaves, and the reason is the focus here. We do not put focus too much on the crop. The focus is in the environment as a whole, in the ecosystem as a whole. The result of that is the ecosystem itself takes care about the crop. We don't fertilize the crop. We feed the soil life, and then they take care about the cane, about its nutrition, its immunologic system, and we don't have one eaten part, one bite, nothing, no disease in our cane, 20,000 hectares. Ecosystem revitalizing agriculture is an agriculture which at the same time provide all conditions for the crop growth with no problems with plagues, diseases, but at the same time providing to the environment the most important environmental services like preserving the water, improving and keeping soil fertility, bringing back the fauna biodiversity, and absorbing carbon from other activities of the economy. One of the most interesting results of the application of the revitalizing agriculture is the radical change of the soil structure. It was recovered in such good level, high level, that the soils are even reaching a soil fertility class higher than there were before man started disturbing the environment. This is a structure, naturally structure, rich soil, and it retains 4 times more water than a conventional soil, in a way that we produce 20% more of the conventional production without any irrigation. And the best thing is this soil helps the water life cycle.
So that was Leontino Balbo Jr. talking about his sugarcane farm in Brazil. Amazing story, no pesticides, no fertilizers, he often says as much or more biodiversity than many of Brazil's national parks. What a great story, Lou.
I love that guy's passion, and I really think that is one of the most inspirational examples of regenerative agriculture we have. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, it's a great story. I never tire of that story. And I've been very fortunate over the last couple of years to interact with farmers like Leontino, but not just, he farms 40,000 acres, but it works at the 1 acre level as well, the 1 acre, the 10 acre, all those different scales. And there's so many things you could say about that. I mean, he pointed out, for example, that the soil holds 4 times more water than if it was just done in a conventional way. And that's so important for the future, where certainly in places like Africa, where you get more droughts, you need more water retention in your soils to create more climate resilient agriculture. A couple of other things about that it is a bit of a journey. It was very experimental. It didn't happen overnight. It took about 15 years. Because it's a family farm, he was able to experiment in different parts of his farm, but not all farmers are so lucky. And so it does actually highlight the importance that you do need financial mechanisms to help with this transition. But it's great. I mean, his is large scale. Toastdale before that is small scale. We need all these scales, all this diversity to really make the circular economy happen.
Just to drill on that point about scale, he's one of the largest exporters of organic sugarcane in the world. He's not operating at a small level, servicing a few businesses in Brazil.
Yeah, no, I think he has about 34% of the organic sugar market worldwide. So it just shows it can happen at scale. We need more big companies like Native doing this.
Well, a lot, not him obviously, but a lot of the examples we've looked at so far have been from relatively small innovators. But what about the big corporates? In this next clip, we're going to hear from the CEO of Danone, I do beg your pardon, Emmanuel Faber.
But how does a company like Danone take steps in that direction and also meet shareholder demands and generate profits?
Wow, yeah, that's obviously the in one way the complex part. But we have to be very clear that it is not opposite to. It has to be both. And the only question, but it's an important question, is the horizon of time at which we are investing. Because when we invest in carbon, when we invest in plastic circularity, what we have decided to do, so in France, for instance, by 2025, all our ingredients will be sourced 100% from regenerative agriculture. We're using France as a pilot board for this. In the US, we have radically changed 75,000 of acres out of GMOs of forage for the milk of the farms, for the cows of the farms that supply our milk, turning to regenerative agricultural practices, sinking carbon back in the soil, generating more biodiversity in the seeds that are being used, and monitoring this in a matter of 2 years. So we do it. but it's an investment. So it starts by an investment, and then it returns. The yield of forage in the 50,000 acres in the US that we started has started by going down. The yield of milk by the cows went down because we changed their nutritional combination. But after only 2 years, it started to go up again. So we know that this is an investment. So the question is the horizon that we discuss with our shareholders. How much can we, on the path of profitable growth for Danone, can we afford to invest for the long term, invest for the midterm, or deliver for the short term in terms of EPS growth? So that's one dimension. Another one is, if you look at the ecosystem of the company, you could say my business is just to focus on my profit, and I don't care about farmers. You know, I pay the lowest price I can. But we know, especially because as basically a milk company, even if today we are also the global leader in plant-based alternative proteins in the US and in Europe in particular, we know that because we collect milk every couple of days to these farms, that without the farmers making a living and their own system being resilient, they will not be farming tomorrow. The prices are going up all the place. I mean, farming is essential. Today in France, again, because of climate change, we will need to change the seeds of wheat, the seeds of maize, if we still want to be able to raise those crops. So there is an urgent need, not a long-term need. And that's the whole discussion that we're having with our shareholders and the basis of why they accepted this idea that we needed to accelerate on our climate investment plans.
That was Emmanuel Faber, CEO of Danone, speaking at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's summit last week. Quite a few things we could unpick from that little snippet, Nick. The ambition to have 100% of ingredients regeneratively farmed, that's connecting back to Leontino. And Emmanuel Faber, they're really talking about even a massive company like Danone, the interconnectedness of his business with the wider ecosystem again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say. It's so great that we have Emmanuel, as his company is one of our strategic partners. And for me, like the really big thing that I take from that is like the journey from linear to circular with a big company like that. It starts with like strong leadership, yeah, a strategy, mindset, and then the other things. But you do need like that leadership and that strategy. So, you know, Emmanuel's a really strong leader, very strong advocate of regenerative agriculture. They have their strategy to be, I think, by 2025, fully regenerative in France, and then maybe by 2050, zero carbon around the world. But then you have to be a little bit experimental. So we started at France. They got their 75,000 acres in the US. And so that sort of reinforces that point I made earlier about that sort of experimental mindset. And then the shareholders, of course. I'm so glad that Emma asked that question, because a big company like Danone, they still have to make profits. So you need to get the shareholders on board to think a little bit longer term. Brilliant.
And you talked earlier in the context of Leontino and Toastdale about those different scales. So great that we've got an example like Gerrard Street. Nice example, clear design change, business model change, product that you can buy or rather subscribe to today. The reality of that sort of parallel conversation that's happening in a very large corporation, how do we start to innovate towards this? How do we steer that tanker?
Yeah.
It's very interesting to look at those two scales.
Definitely. I mean, with IKEA, for example, another one of our strategic partners, they have the strong leadership, they have the strategy, I think fully circular by 2030, and now they've got to get into the weeds, into the details. They've recently analysed an analysis of 10,000 of their items. So looking at 10,000 items, looking at the design.
10,000 of
10,000,
basically, yeah.
exactly. So you've got Gerrard Street 1, you've got IKEA, they've looked at 10,000. Yeah. How can we redesign these so they can be reusable, they can be refurbishable, they can be shareable or whatever. And then they need to then reconfigure their infrastructure, which at the moment is making stuff in factories, pumping it out. They have to reconfigure it, and so it actually comes back in. And so you have like an infrastructure where materials and products can circulate rather than just flow one way. So it's a big undertaking, but it starts with leadership, strategy, mindset.
Mm-hmm. Right, so we've talked about business and we've talked about products and design and food at various different scales. And we're nearly at the end of our greatest hits of circular economy. We've got one more example. I was able to catch up with the Foundation's Government and Cities lead, Ashma Sukhdev, because we wanted to share an example, her favourite example, of the circular economy in operation at a regional or city level. So listen to what she said when I asked her that question. We often talk about the circular economy, or our favourite circular economy examples are often like a kind of single product or service. But you, in your time at the Foundation, have worked a lot with our city and regional partners. And so I wanted to ask you, in that context, what's your favourite example of the circular economy in action?
My go-to example, and one of my favorites, is actually from the city of Belo Horizonte in Brazil. It is, for those of you that don't know, Brazil's, I think, third largest city, so quite big in scale. And Brazil on the whole, and the city of Belo Horizonte in particular, were facing quite a significant e-waste problem. So think old computers, phones, etc., piling up. And as a solution to that e-waste problem, the city decided to set up these centers for computer reconditioning. So places where they were actually taking the old computers, not sending them to landfill and turning them into new ones. What was really unique about these computer reconditioning centers was that they got citizens from low-income communities, usually youth who are unemployed from the age of 16 to 24, to actually receive extensive training on how to restore those computers and the IT equipment in general. And then the refurbished computers would actually then go on to support more than 300 digital inclusion sites. So those computers were being used then by locals who didn't have access to computers and the internet otherwise, who had limited digital literacy. So they were kind of being used to equip public libraries and schools and these inclusion centers. And I think the reason that I love this example is that firstly, it's of course tackling e-waste, but it's also sort of resulting in skills training for those that are unemployed and digital inclusion for people who don't have access to computers otherwise. So it's a great example of the circular economy in action.
And I guess like it speaks to this, you know, I fronted it by saying examples that go beyond like how we redesigning a very specific product. It talks about a kind of larger redesign of I guess in that case of like a kind of community that speaks to some of the opportunities that exist when you apply this concept to restructure social issues and social topics, as well as just, you know, for example, like a pair of headphones being more modular by design.
Exactly. And when you're thinking about the cities trying to solve these problems, they're always thinking at that kind of broader scale. They're not just having to deal with one set of headphones and how that's going to be designed or remanufactured. They're having to think about the whole system and how do they take all of this e-waste, solve that problem and stop e-waste going to landfill, but also how do they solve for their other priorities around economic development and social inclusion. So that's why I love kind of these city scale examples.
That was Ashma, our Governments and Cities lead. Nick, where do people go from here to find out more brilliant circular economy examples and the best of our greatest hits?
Okay, well, the obvious place is to go to our website, and we have our case study library there. So we have 60 or 70 or 80 cases covering all sectors, cities, policy, you name it. I quite like Circulate, our Circulate news platform. I think it's on Medium. That brings together cases under particular sort of subjects, such as food and agriculture and even different regions of the world. So Circulate's a good place. And of course, YouTube, our YouTube channel. Just have a little ferret around there. There are some lovely videos you'll find talking about these, you know, Leontina Balbo and others. So yeah, there are a few places you can look.
That was really, really good, Nick. But you did miss out one absolutely critical place where people can get more examples of that, and that is this show.
Oh,
This show. Thank you so much for streaming into the first episode of our Explore the Circular Economy show season 2. We do stream every Tuesday at 12 p.m. UK time, which is GMT +1 at the moment. And we will have lots more examples of the circular economy in action, and we will be exploring the circular economy through the lens of various topics. If you want to find out what's coming up, do check out the Foundation's website and navigate to the webpage. There's a news item on our front page right now that links you through. But next week, we're going to be talking about how do we apply the circular economy principles to water. We've kind of teased water a couple times in a few of the examples we've given, but we're going to be diving more deeply into it. Do remember to subscribe to all of our channels, wherever you're listening to, and check out for the podcast that will come out sometime next week. But that's all for this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the Circular Economy Show.